Chapter 10, Sanctuary Shadows, New Orleans. July 1925. St. Louis Cathedral stood as a sentinel in the heart of Jackson Square, its white facade glowing faintly under the gaslights, its spires piercing the humid night sky. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of incense and beeswax, the flickering glow of votive candles casting long shadows across the pews. Julien Dubois knelt in the front row, his dark eyes fixed on the crucifix above the altar, his hands clasped around the rosary he'd carried since childhood. The familiar rhythm of prayer, Ave Maria, Gratia Plena, rolled through his mind, but the words felt hollow, a fragile shield against the darkness that had chased him and Celeste into this sacred space. At 35, Julien was a man caught between worlds, his Creole heritage, his Catholic faith, and the voodoo-tinged supernatural reality he could no longer deny. The vampire's pursuit from Celeste's apartment, their red eyes and hissed threats, "We'll find you, marked one," had driven them here to holy ground, a refuge that had held so far. But Julien knew it wouldn't hold forever. The memory of the spirit girl from his past, her hollow eyes in the bayou, pressed against him, a reminder that he might be the marked one the ritual demanded. His father's unsolved case from 1895, Victor Leroux's involvement, the silver amulet Father Etienne had used, it all pointed to a truth Julien wasn't sure he was ready to face. Celeste Moreau sat beside him, her practical blouse and trousers a stark contrast to the cathedral's solemnity, her auburn hair still tangled from their escape. At 28, she was a modern woman in a city that clung to tradition, her green eyes sharp with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. Her small derringer rested on the pew beside her, a reminder of the danger they'd barely outrun, and the file from Julien's office, the 1895 case notes, was tucked into her purse, its revelations about the ritual and the amulet burning in her mind. She wasn't a believer, not like Julien, but the cathedral's quiet strength offered a moment of respite, a chance to breathe after the chaos of the night. "We can't stay here forever," Celeste whispered, her voice low, meant for Julien alone. "They're out there waiting. We need to find Father Antoine. He might know more about that amulet, or at least where to look for Mama Zora at this hour." Julien nodded, his jaw tight as he stood, brushing the rosary back into his pocket. "Father Antoine's been my mentor since I was a boy," he said, his Creole accent soft but heavy with memory. "If anyone knows about Father Etienne's work, it's him. But he's got his own secrets, always has. We need to be careful what we say." They moved toward the sacristy at the back of the cathedral, their footsteps echoing on the stone floor, the stained-glass windows casting fractured light across their path. Julien knocked on the heavy wooden door, and after a moment, it creaked open, revealing Father Antoine. In his 50s, the priest was a wiry man with graying hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see too much. He wore a simple black cassock, a silver cross hanging around his neck, and his expression was a mix of surprise and concern as he took in Julien and Celeste. "Julien," Father Antoine said, his voice a low rumble, tinged with a Cajun accent. "What brings you here at this hour? And who's this?" "Celeste Moreau, Times-Picayune," Celeste said, extending a hand, her journalist's confidence cutting through the tension. "We're working on a case, murders tied to a ritual. We need your help, Father." Father Antoine's eyes narrowed, but he stepped aside, ushering them into the sacristy and closing the door behind them. The small room was cluttered with liturgical vestments, candles, and old books, the air thick with the scent of wax and dust. A single lamp burned on a table, casting a warm glow across the priest's weathered face as he gestured for them to sit. "Murders," Father Antoine repeated, his voice heavy with understanding. "I've heard whispers, bodies drained of blood, strange symbols. The city's on edge, Julien. What do you know?" Julien hesitated, his hand brushing the rosary in his pocket, a reflex he couldn't shake. "It's more than murders," he said finally, his voice low. "We've seen vampires, Father. Real ones. They're after a ritual, same as the one in 95 that Father Etienne stopped. They're using a symbol, a crescent moon with thorns, to mark their victims, takin their souls. And they're looking for a marked one to finish it. I think it might be me." Father Antoine's expression darkened, his fingers tightening around the silver cross at his neck. "The marked one," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Father Etienne spoke of such a thing, a soul tied to the old magic, chosen by the spirits. He believed it was a child he'd blessed in the bayou, a boy who'd seen a spirit. "Julien, that was you." Julien's blood ran cold, the memory of the spirit girl, her hollow eyes, her whispered voice, flooding back with a clarity that made his chest ache. Me, he repeated, his voice raw, his Creole accent thickening with emotion. I saw her when I was 15 in the bayou. She spoke my name, then vanished. Father Etienne. He knew. Father Antoine nodded, his blue eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and resolve. He did. He blessed you to protect you, but he feared the vampires would come for you one day. That's why he used the silver amulet in 95, a charm blessed by a voodoo priestess, meant to ward off blood drinkers. It drove Victor Leroux away, but Etienne died not long after, and the amulet was lost. I've searched for it over the years, but... He trailed off, his gaze distant, as if seeing ghosts of his own. Celeste leaned forward, her green eyes sharp with determination. We need that amulet, Father, she said, her voice firm. Or something like it. The vampires are closing in, they chased us here. If we don't stop Leroux, more people will die, and Julien. She glanced at him, her expression softening, a flicker of fear breaking through her bravado. Father Antoine stood, crossing to a small chest in the corner of the room, his movements deliberate. He unlocked it with a key from his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch, its surface etched with voodoo symbols. Inside was a silver medallion, its edges worn but its surface gleaming, engraved with a cross and a crescent moon. This isn't the amulet Etienne used, he said, handing it to Julien. But it's similar, blessed by Mama Zora herself years ago. It'll protect you, but only for a time. You'll need to find Leroux, end this ritual before he finishes it. Julien took the medallion, its weight cold and heavy in his hand, a faint hum of energy pulsing through it. Thank you, Father, he said, his voice gruff, his dark eyes meeting the priest's. But we need to find Mama Zora. She'll know more about how to use this, how to stop Leroux for good. Father Antoine nodded, his expression grim. She's in hiding, he said. Last I heard, she was in the lower 9th ward, near the old cypress grove. But be careful, Julien. The vampires won't stop until they have what they want. Before Julien could respond, a low growl echoed from the cathedral's nave, the sound reverberating through the stone walls like a death knell. Celeste grabbed her derringer, her green eyes wide with alarm, while Julien clutched the medallion, his revolver already in his other hand. Father Antoine crossed himself, his voice a whisper as he muttered a prayer, his blue eyes darting to the door. They've found a way in, Father Antoine said, his voice tight with fear. The holy ground, it's not enough. They must be desperate. Julien moved to the door, peering through the crack, his heart pounding as he saw 3 vampires prowling the nave, their pale skin and glowing red eyes a stark contrast to the sacred space. They moved with a predator's grace, their claws scraping against the stone floor, their hisses filling the air with menace. We need to go, Julien said, turning to Celeste, his voice urgent. There's a side door leads to the alley. We can make it to the lower 9th if we move fast. Celeste nodded, stuffing the file back into her purse, her derringer at the ready. Let's go, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She glanced at Father Antoine, a flicker of gratitude in her expression. Thank you, Father. Stay safe. Father Antoine pressed a small vial of holy water into Julien's hand, his voice a fervent whisper. May God protect you both, he said, crossing himself again as they slipped out of the sacristy. They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows of the cathedral's side aisle, the vampires' growls growing louder as they sensed their prey. Julien clutched the medallion, its faint hum a small comfort as they reached the side door, slipping into the alley just as a vampire lunged, its claws slashing at the air where they'd been. The creature hissed, its red eyes narrowing, but the medallion seemed to hold it at bay, its glow flaring briefly as the vampire recoiled. They ran through the alley, the French Quarter a blur of cobblestones and gaslights, their breaths coming in short gasps as they headed toward the lower 9th ward. The vampires gave chase, their hisses echoing through the night, but Julien and Celeste didn't stop, their hands brushing as they ran, a silent promise to face whatever came next together. The cathedral's bells tolled behind them, a mournful sound that seemed to mourn the city's lost innocence. New Orleans was a city of shadows, and they were running straight into the darkest one yet.